This is In the Black, a leadership, strategy and business podcast brought to you by CPA Australia. Welcome to In the Black. I'm Garreth Hanley, podcast producer here at CPA Australia. Today, we're talking about all things data. Data is an integral part of business. It has been described as the new oil and our most valuable asset. But how do we manage our data so it doesn't become a costly liability? Today, we're talking with Daragh O Brien. Daragh demystifies data for a living. He's the founder and managing director at Castlebridge and a university lecturer in Ireland. For a full list of Daragh's credentials, don't forget to check the show notes for this episode. In today's show, he explains the costs and benefits of data, where data risks can come from, and how to get your data right. I started by asking Daragh about his unusual path into data management.
Okay, the first aspect of it is my name. The name Daragh has many different spellings and is gender neutral in the 9 languages that there is a phonetic version of the name Daragh in. So ever since I was a small kid, I spell my name with one R and a GH at the end. And ever since I was a small kid, I was very much in favor of people spelling my name right. And it used to annoy me when people spelled my name wrong. And then I discovered all the other spellings as I got older. So it made me aware of how data, whatever way we want to pronounce it, how important that can be to people. And then trundling along through life, I did a degree in business and law at University College Dublin in the 90s. Before that, my mother was running an adult education centre, and she was getting software to try out. And being a slightly nerdy teenager who taught myself to program when I was 8, I got to play with all those toys. So I started understanding there was software to do things with data. So a degree in business law, then I went into working in a phone company and working for friends of mine who did computer science degrees, 2 part-time jobs while I was in university. In the phone company, I was doing data projects. I was helping build little things to help run call centers more efficiently in the call center. Working on the business side, I was never in IT. And my friend's company, I was helping computer science graduates understand how businesses worked because I was coming from a business background. And eventually, by 2009, I was the deputy head of regulatory in the phone company, having been the head of single view of customer for a few years prior to that. So how did I become a data expert? Trial and error, hard work, and luck. And I've also had the incredible good fortune to have some fantastic mentors, both professionally and in the data world, many of whom are quite good friends now, long-standing friends, who encouraged me to explore not just the technology side of data, but the human side, the business process side and the human factor side of data as an asset in organizations. So that's the various strands of the story coming together, and I kind of wound up now with Castlebridge, my team. We help organizations understand data as a business asset. We help them understand from the people side of the business how to use the technology more effectively so that they can derive the maximum value from data.
Now, you mentioned that your name being spelled incorrectly was what started all this. Is there anywhere else where you've encountered bad data along the way?
Okay, there's a couple of stories here. I'll start with a personal story. A mobile phone operator here in Ireland who had my business mobile account with decided to write to me as Miss Daragh O Brien, their valued business customer. Not once, but multiple times. My name is gender neutral. And as part of cleaning their data, as part of enhancing data, they had decided to assign a gender to me. So long before we had any discussion about gender assignment in the media, I was given a gender assignment by my phone company, and I objected to this. And a number of iterations back and forth with them. And what was happening was every time I got them to correct the data in the contact center, they'd fix the data on my record, and then a few weeks later, it will be broken again. It'll be reset back to Miss Daragh O Brien. Now, The root cause of that was that the phone company had bought a particular data quality tool that had in its reference data set a rule that said Daragh was a female name. So I understood the reasoning behind that, but it was very frustrating. When I was in the phone company, one of my key roles in the regulatory function was to make sure that the phone bills were accurate. What we had to do in that process was to stop incorrect bills getting out. So if the billing cycle was 4 weeks, we had 2 weeks to find the problem, a week to fix it, test it, and deploy the fix into production before the bills issued. The key element there are small things. Everyone talks about big data, but often it's the small data is the problem. One of the funniest ones I saw over the years, if I buy a toaster on a Monday, Amazon will then send me marketing emails and prompts on the Wednesday and Friday asking me, saying, you've recently bought a toaster. Would you like to buy another toaster? Now, if I bought a toaster, I don't want a toaster. I want some bread. And that's an example of using the data in the wrong way to generate the wrong signal and take the wrong action from the data. Like, predictive analytics is fantastic if you're actually predicting things, but if I've bought a toaster recently, it's highly unlikely I'm going to buy another toaster immediately, unless I collect toasters.
Daragh, I've heard a lot about data being called the new oil, and Amazon is one of those companies that's leveraged data for their business operations. Recently, we've heard about lots of data breaches, both globally and also here in Australia. And there's been a lot of talk about how we can protect our own data. Now, Daragh, you are the expert here. So how would you describe what data is? Why is it being called the new oil? And what are the benefits for businesses who are collecting data?
Okay, well, so what's data? At its simplest, it's a record of a fact about a thing, an event, or a person that, when used with an understanding of its context, can tell us something about that thing, that event, or that person that we can then use to make decisions or take actions that will add value. So if you look at the fundamental accounting definition of an asset, something which on its own or when combined with another asset can be used to generate net cash inflows or deliver services, that's data. So it's describing the fact of the thing, the event, or the person. It becomes information when you have context around it that enables you to understand it, that enables you to apply it, and then it becomes actionable knowledge once you can put that into a process or a procedure for taking action. I'll give an example. 007. What is that? We don't know what that is without some context. So if I say 007...
James Bond springs to mind.
Yeah. It's also the international access code for Russia.
There you go.
Who says data nerds in the telecom sector don't have a sense of humor? I'm trying to find out the chicken and egg here. Which came first? 007 as the character or 007 as the international access code? Because either Ian Fleming had a sense of humor or telecoms nerds had a sense of humor. I'm not sure which. So that's what data is. So data is the new oil. Well, the origin of that phrase is a woman called Michelle Finner and Dennerty, who is a very good friend of mine. She was the first chief privacy officer in Silicon Valley in the 90s. She was privacy officer for Sun Microsystems. She now runs a privacy enhancing technology startup called Privacy Code in California. But she was actually misquoted. She said, data is the new oil, except that it's not. And everyone missed the second part of that sentence, because data is the new oil to an extent in that it's a valuable asset. It's a consumable asset. It's something that can be used to fuel and do other things. So it's kind of an easy, lazy metaphor. But data is different to oil because it's a fungible resource and that you can use it many places at many times. It's non-exhaustive. The information you have about invoicing in a business can be used to inform marketing planning, can be used to inform credit decisions, as well as managing the bank balance and the bottom line of the business. So in that context, data is incredibly useful for fueling organizations and fueling businesses. In terms of data as the new oil, the only way I would say data as new oil applies is when you talk about those things of data breaches and data leaks. Data is the new oil, and every day we see the equivalent of a digital Exxon Valdez, where the oil is escaping and bad things are happening as a result. I often say that data is the new plutonium because it's really powerful, really useful, but you wouldn't want to have too much of it on you. And one of my students in university coined the phrase data is the new nuclear fusion, because once you get it right, it becomes a very powerful and self-sustaining source of energy for your organization.
Okay, so if data is the new nuclear fusion, let's talk about the risks. What are the risks for businesses who are involved in data collection and data storage?
Okay, first of all, every business is involved in data collection or data storage. So everyone focuses on the big tech. Yay, they have lots of data. But if you're running a bakery and you have customers and you have a loyalty card scheme, or you know about your regular customers, or you know about your suppliers, or you're generating invoices, or you're having invoices coming into you, that's all data. In terms of the risks, well, you've quality risks. Is the data accurate? Is it up to date? Is it complete? I've worked with one business in Ireland here where one of the key challenges they encountered just coming into the pandemic, was that the accounting firm they were working with wasn't updating their internal management accounts on a frequent enough basis. They were doing the financial accounting side of things fantastically well, or reasonably well. But the company actually didn't have a real bottom line, accurate understanding of where they were month on month or quarter on quarter. So they went into the pandemic with a realization that there was a hole in their bucket, and they needed to fix that hole while dealing with lockdowns. And that was a challenge for them. And that's data. That's data completeness, consistency, timeliness, all these measurable characteristics of quality. The risk is if you are mishandling that data in any way, if you aren't having proper controls over that, that can impact the trust that customers or staff or suppliers have in your business. And that's not just security, it's things like spelling customers' names right. It's things like ensuring that you apply marketing suppressions correctly on data so that you don't send spam emails to customers who don't want them. And finally, there's the obvious one, security. It's a valuable asset. It doesn't appear on your balance sheet as an asset, but if you have a ransomware attack and you suddenly can't do business, you become very painfully aware of how important an asset data is to your organization. And the risks there are malicious actors outside your organization trying to leverage your asset, trying to steal your asset in the same way as malicious actors outside your organization might try and get in and steal physical assets. But also there's the accidental or malicious actions that staff might take in your organization. So a well-natured, well-meaning member of your staff does something accidentally and sends a customer list to one of your competitors by mistake. Shock horror, bad thing has happened to you. A valuable assets in the hands of a competitor, or a disgruntled soon-to-be ex-staff member decides to copy a customer list to bring to one of your competitors because they're changing job. These are all the types of risks that occur, and 69% of security risks are happening inside the organization. People accidentally doing things or not thinking about what they're doing with data. And ultimately, when we look at the statistics on data quality costs between 10 and 35% of turnover in the average organization. Because every time you have to correct incorrect data, you're paying for that data twice or three times. There's the cost of collection, the cost of correction of the data, maybe the cost of correction of the relationship with a customer. You have to give a refund or a voucher or something. So there are the sorts of risks and issues that can arise.
You're talking about a combination of collection, usage, and regulatory.
Collection, usage, regulatory, because you have to think about it holistically.
Okay, Daragh. So for our listeners who are running or managing a business and collecting data, if they're aligned with their local regulatory requirements and have assessed their collection and usage, but are concerned they might be getting bad data, what do they need to look out for? And if they do find bad data, can they turn it into good data?
One of our clients here in Dublin is a dog rehoming charity. And they have a mantra that there's no such thing as a bad dog. There is a dog that has been mistreated, mistrained, or isn't the right dog for the environment that the dog has been put into. And that's where you get behavioral issues with dogs, is their experience. So no such thing as a bad dog. There's no such thing as bad data, because it's all about the context. So what's good data? Well, in an organization context, it's about looking at the process that you're using the data in and understanding what is critical to the quality execution of that process, the delivery of the outcome you want. So if it's invoicing data, what are the business rules around what you need to have in an invoice for it to be processed accurately? What are the things that cause delays or impacts on your invoice to pay process? What's the lead time there? If a client decides that there's a purchase order number not on the invoice, well, the absence of that purchase order number is a data quality problem. We need to understand where that came from. We've now made sure our processes are aligned, that if we always ask, is the client's payment process on invoices requiring a purchase order? And if it does require a purchase order, boots do not go on the ground until we have a purchase order number. And that's a control we have in place so that when we send in our invoice, we will get paid on time. And that's the process we've mapped to make sure we know the data and what's critical. And that's how we get good data. Can you turn bad data into good data? There's lots of tools out there for cleaning data and correcting errors in data. Going back to my first example about my name, you have to be very careful and clear about the rules you're applying to the data in terms of what good data looks like. Defining what good is the first step in moving from less than good data or bad data to good data. But it's much more important, Gareth, to actually look at the process that's creating the data and fix the process. The best way to fix data problems is to fix the process that is causing the data problem. Because if you focus on, there's lots of businesses, lots of companies out there selling tools and technologies or services to clean data, to clean marketing lists, things like that. But again, that goes back, you're paying for that data twice. Whereas if you fix the process, if you plan for your data as an asset and understand your process and identify where the problems are arising, that's how you start to improve the quality and usability of your data. Something as simple as a business over the years, we've changed accountants a few times. And it's things like the mapping of the chart of accounts as you're moving from one accounting package to another, migrating data from one accounting package to another. It's one thing to take all the balances and start a clean slate moving into your new accounting package. But from a management accounting perspective, an internal reporting perspective, I need to be able to compare quarter on quarter and period on period at a more granular level. So we need to be able to map and migrate that data. We've actually worked with our accountants here in Wexford, in Ireland, to map. We did a proper data migration mapping, which they'd actually not done to the level we would do it before, because we wanted to make sure we had consistency of the data, because we wanted to make sure our reporting would run smoothly as we moved from one accounting package into another, because we didn't want to have the overhead and the hassle of running 3 or 4 Excel spreadsheets on the side to keep a track of our internal management account. Bad data becomes good data by improving the environment, improving the process, and thinking about what's important. And that allows you to maintain the level of quality of data because you've planned for it as an asset. In the same way as if you're hiring staff, you've planned for the staff you need. You have controls in place through interviewing, etc., to try and get the right staff into the role. And you have measures you take in terms of performance management to improve staff, to make sure they're doing the job they should be doing. Or if you're buying something as humble as a calculator or a computer, you have specification for what you want it to do and the functionality it needs to have. Having that specified from a data perspective is the first key step to making sure that you don't have bad data, that you are capturing good data as much as possible, and that you know how to turn your bad data into good data.
If you're enjoying this episode of In the Black, you might like our Excel Tips podcast. Each week, our resident Excel expert, Neil Blackwood, CPA, brings you tips and tricks for Microsoft Excel. Search for Excel Tips in your favourite podcast app or check the show notes in this episode to subscribe. Now, back to In the Black.
It sounds like what you're saying there is that having a lot of data, if it's not collected properly, can be problematic. So before businesses collect data, they should firstly identify their needs, then develop a process for collecting the right data, and then think about starting to generate and collect the data. Is that right?
That's the ideal world, Gareth, yeah. The life cycle of data is exactly the same as the life cycle of any other asset. And the problem we have in organizations most often is that people jump into the obtain stage. So the generic life cycle of data: plan, obtain, store and share, maintain, apply and dispose. They're the key steps we go through in handling any asset, from shoes to laptops to data. But we jump in at the obtain stage quite often with data where people go, we can get all its data, so let's have it, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do with it later. Anytime you've filled out a loyalty card application form in your supermarket or a gym membership form, all those questions they ask you, well, sometimes they don't need that data. Sometimes that's them gathering information and then they'll figure out what they want to use it for later. The best way for organizations to manage data risk is to be clear what is important, what's the critical data you need, what are the critical things you need to do with data, and have a strategy for data in your organization that's supporting your business strategy. And that's for organizations of all sizes. And like we work with organizations from government departments and multinationals down to small not-for-profit organizations. And for all of them, while the mechanics and the methods might differ slightly in how we go about doing it, the fundamental is what's the business objective you have? What data do you need to deliver on that business objective? And then what do you need to do to either get the data or manage the data, store the data, apply it in the organization, and also thinking about what level of quality you need, what level of formatting of data do you need to make sure it can be used consistently so you're not having to incur additional hidden costs. I said earlier on, 10 to 35% of turnover. That's a number that hasn't changed in 25 years. It's the little things of people having to rekey phone numbers or correct customer addresses, things like that. Part of your plan for data then needs to be where you're storing it, how you're managing it, so that you can apply appropriate security controls, but also so you can make sure you don't have multiple copies of the same data. Right, from an accounting perspective, if I told you I had four different versions of the books for my business because the marketing department didn't like the accounting system, so they wanted to do things their own way, that would probably cause auditors to shudder significantly. It's hard enough getting your core data set correct and managed and maintained without having all these satellite copies popping up around the organization. And that's where the plan comes in. Sometimes redundancy is important and useful. So you might, in an accounting context, take data from your accounting system and use it and take copies of that for analysis in a management accounting or management reporting perspective. Same data, different bucket. But that's something you're planning for and you've processes and controls around. And that's the key thing for organizations of any size. What's your business objective? What data do you need to achieve that objective? What's your plan for that data? And then implementing that plan in the same way as when you're setting up an accounting system. What's your chart of accounts? How do you structure it? And then what are your processes for invoices in, bills out, and tracking the cash? That's all data.
So should businesses be focusing on big data at all? Or are they better off to focus on small or bespoke data?
Big data is just small data that has lots of friends. I come from the telecom sector, and long before there was this hype around big data, we had call data records. Every individual telephone call that you make generates a significant amount of data, even a landline call. And on an individual level, that's used to generate your bill. But on an analytics level, we can start to look at that at scale and go, oh, hang on a second, this is the pattern of calls this person makes, and we can use that data for other purposes. Don't get me started on what we can find out about you from your mobile, from your cell phone. Where you were when you made the call, how fast your car was moving when you made the call based on how quickly it took you to get between two cell towers, things like that. I have always hated the term big data because it's a marketing word. It's just data. I actually coined the phrase morbidly obese data because that's big data that's sitting on the couch doing nothing. And for most organizations, that's what they have. They think they've got big data, but they don't, because most of what they have, they're not using.
So is this a case where businesses are looking for the solution before finding the problem?
And in a lot of cases, that's what it is. Organizations have gathered the data. So the disciplines and the plan for whether it's big data or your small data or bespoke data, it's the same thing. Like it's the same steps you go through. What's your business objective? You mightn't need big data. You mightn't have enough customers to have big data. But it might be really, really essential that something as simple as your invoice to cash process runs smoothly, and that when you're chasing invoices, you have the right contact information for people in your customer organization so that you can get through the layers quickly to collect. And for most businesses, that's actually more important than a future-looking predictive analytics piece. I'm really passionate about this aspect of there's the fundamentals of doing data and the fundamentals of doing business, and then everything else is value add, but it's only value add if you have a business. I've worked with lots of startups doing AI technology. It's wonderful, fantastic, fascinating stuff. But the key question keeps going back. How is this going to add value to the business? And that's where your business objectives, data strategy, is big data part of that? And what do we do? Because ultimately, all the data quality problems you have, as you aggregate your data up to create big data, it's made up of your small data. And if that data has problems in terms of accuracy, timeliness, consistency, or other data quality issues, the analysis you do on your big data will be wrong.
Do you see that a lot, where businesses are collecting the wrong type of data or interested in something that's less important than what they should be interested in?
Yeah, we see that quite a bit. Organizations who are just gathering data because they've been told big data is an important thing, or you need to improve your analytics capability. Fantastic. What data? How? Why? A lot of what organizations really need to do isn't glamorous stuff. Big data is great. It has a wonderful marketing department. AI has a wonderful marketing department. Clean data doesn't really have a good marketing department, but it's actually probably more important in an ongoing operational context in businesses. So in that context, we worked with an organization a couple of years ago that was looking to spend quite a lot of money on a predictive recommendations engine for their product. And the problem they had was they didn't have good enough data about their product to actually inform the predictive analytics engine. The things they needed to use to analyze to make those recommendations to customers, they just didn't have that data consistently to a high level of quality and completeness in their product catalog, so that when they pointed this recommendations engine at that data to help customers, we see you bought a toaster, would you like some bread? They didn't have that data to make that next best product recommendation. And in the end, they actually pivoted their data strategy towards focusing back internally on improving product quality first. And that actually turned out to have a bigger impact for the business because it reduced the admin overhead they had fulfilling orders, because on the admin side of their business, they were having to correct orders, correct shipments, correct invoices because the wrong product codes were being used and things like that within the business, because the data they had wasn't as good as they thought it was. But that had been seen as the cost of doing business for a while, until we looked at it and said, well, it's 11% of your turnover. Are you happy with that? Given you have a target of improving your profitability by 5% this year, by fixing this, you exceed your target. And if you spend your money on this fancy thing, it will fail. And that's quite a common thing, because people think data is a magical thing, and it is, but only if you've cared for it and fed it properly.
Okay, looking forward, Daragh, what is the future of data collection and data quality? You've mentioned AI as having a great marketing department, and there is a lot of talk around tools like ChatGPT and other AI systems at the moment. Do these tools have potential to improve data management? If organisations are looking for these sorts of tools to help, will they help? And what do you think the next 12 months of data collection might look like?
I'm always wary about making predictions. What I would say is that any tool will help if you're using it in the right way and if you are putting the right resources to use with that tool. Go back to the definition of an asset, something that on its own or combined with another asset can deliver net cash inflow or deliver service. Tools like AI tools, there's a lot of fantastic use cases and examples of AI being used really, really well in a variety of industries to improve processes, to speed things up. But they're usually industries that have large amounts of data available. Tools like ChatGPT, I think, will help raise people's awareness about the importance of quality in to deliver quality out. Garbage in, garbage out remains a fundamental concept in data and in life. As organizations start to adopt these tools, they're going to start finding that they make stuff up, because all they are, I don't know your vintage, Gareth, but I'm old enough to remember Microsoft Clippy, the annoying paperclip in Office 97.
I thought maybe they'd bring Clippy back with some of this new technology.
Well, Clippy was great because Clippy could identify you were trying to write a letter and would offer to help, but knew nothing about writing letters. And these AI tools are just an iteration above that, where they're collecting data and they're responding to prompts, but they are a predictive model. They basically crunch data to figure out what the thing should be in response to your answer. And they've already been identified as making up things. I asked ChatGPT to write a profile for me as a biography for a book. So what would you write as my bio? And it was wrong. It credited me with writing a book that a competitor wrote. And it also told me that I was on a data governance board run by the Irish Data Protection Commission, a board that doesn't exist. But apparently I'd share it. In a parallel universe, maybe that's happening. But garbage in, garbage out, and understanding what the tools need. I think what we're going to find over the next 12 months is that we might see the beginnings of a demystification of some of these tools, which will be very, very useful, which means businesses won't necessarily dive into spending large amounts of money on them. In the Australian context, I know your Attorney General has just announced or put forward a proposal to improve Australia's federal data privacy laws to align with European standards, to align with GDPR. That's a big wake-up call for businesses. And any of your listeners who are advising their customers, time to get your house in order. It takes 3 to 5 years to get this right from an internal operations perspective in a moderate to large-sized organization. The basics are relatively straightforward, but it's a culture change and mindset change, not a technology change in most organizations. And that's something that's coming down the pipeline in Australia. But in terms of new tools, we're going to see lots of hype, lots of hoopla. We're going to see lots of companies that have spent lots of money trying to develop these technologies, coming under pressure to deliver a return on the investment for their investors. And that's where we're going to start seeing the tide going out. And the question will be, which of these tools is actually wearing their swimming togs when the tide goes out? Which of these technologies actually can be demonstrated to deliver consistent value? And that's going to really come back to how are they being used and how good is the data they were being built on and trained on.
Is that regulation piece something that's happening worldwide?
Yeah, it's happening globally. Personally, I've been involved in working with countries in sub-Saharan Africa. My company's currently involved in a number of projects in the Middle East where these laws are being enacted. And organizations are having to put in place these processes, these controls, and they're having to actually start thinking about data and thinking about it in the context of their processes, not as a byproduct or as a second level order of concern, but as a core part of how they do business. And it's the data about people. And that crops up in places you mightn't expect. You might be in a business-to-business context, but unless you're selling to a robot on the other end of the phone, you are talking to a person. You are sending an email to a person. You are phoning a person, and you have data about that person. And even in a business-to-business context, if you have a mishap with that data, if you have your equivalent of the digital Exxon Valdez and the contact information or information about your interactions with a contact in another business are disclosed or leaked or become subject to a ransomware attack or something like that, that's embarrassing to your business and potentially harmful to your business and almost certainly costly to your business. And the regulation will cover that because it's still data about people.
So are those regulatory changes due to a shift in the way governments are thinking about data or as a response to recent events?
One of the key things we're beginning to see is organizations and governments are beginning to realize that data is a social thing, not a technology thing. And it affects society and how people interact in society. So partly disinformation and misinformation on social media, but even simple things like how governments use data to inform decisions on policy. And that's going to become an increasingly important aspect of social and political life going forward. And that leads to potential ethical issues and ethical concerns as well about how we use data. So even before we have laws and regulation, we have to think about how we're using data to benefit people, benefit our organizations, and benefit our societies, rather than necessarily having a very narrow focus on how we are going to maximize the bottom line rigorously. Data is a slightly bigger consideration in that regard.
Daragh, thanks so much. It's been great talking to you. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but thank you for joining us on In the Black.
Thanks very much, Gareth. It's great to talk to you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, help others discover In the Black by leaving us a review and sharing this episode with colleagues, clients, or anyone else interested in leadership, strategy, and business. To find out more about our other podcasts, check out the show notes for this episode. We hope you can join us again next time for another episode of In the Black.